Alright, start recording. So you guys all have this ogre, right? And you should have it with, you probably got it just like with the leg. Just a leg rig. Let's see if I can actually just hide everything else. There we go. So you guys probably have something like this. If you followed along with the lecture anyway. Both legs. There we go. Alright, so you guys have something like this, probably rigged up real simple, maybe with IK, maybe without. Right, true. Thank you. I forgot to do that. That would make more sense. There we go. Okay, cool. Now everybody can see my screen. Cool. So then I'll just go over that again since I'm presenting now. I have a full rig here, rigged up the ogre character that Gavin gave you guys, so I'm assuming you all should have the ogre character downloaded and in a blend file somewhere. And I'm just going to get rid of those. So you guys have something like this. You've got your root bone and your legs, and you maybe attached your legs to the... How can I hide these here? Cool. Maybe you guys attach your legs to the model, did some posing, things like that. I see JJ did an animation, and I know a few of you have already done this since I saw your submissions on the activity board. For those of you who didn't, now's the chance to follow along with it, and we'll have it completed for submission. Alright, but once I've got my leg, I'm going to parent it to the armature with automatic weights. Cool. And that's going to introduce my vertex groups. And there they are. I have a lot more here because I did everything. Maybe I should delete it. Get rid of all of them. Oh, it still does them all. Okay, never mind. We'll hop into weight painting mode. And start finding our bones. So the first thing I think Gavin mentioned, which is probably really useful, is turning off lock object modes. Because what that does is it makes it so that if you're in object mode, you can only access other objects in object mode, right? But here, while we're in weight paint mode, we still want to be able to access our armature bones. So I'm going to go back to object mode. I'm going to select the armature first, and then the body. And then I'm going to go into weight paint. And now my bones are here, and I can control click them. You see these ones are all pink because they're non-deform bones. So when it's pink, right, when you try to do a new texture, for example, it's bright pink because it's missing. Because these are non-deform bones, they can't have weights, so it's going to turn bright pink. But if I click on a deform bone here, like the leg, you'll see the weight comes up. All right, so everybody gets that much, yeah? Don't take that as a yes. Anyway, but the automatic weighting isn't great most of the time. So as you can see here, like my leg bone currently also includes a lot of the foot. And my foot bone currently, actually it's not too bad, but this bone includes too much of the foot. This bone goes way too high up the body. It's coming all the way up into the chest here. So if I were to rotate this now in pose mode, grab the IK, you can see it's twisting all the way up to the top of his chest here. And a really easy way to think about it is, especially for like humanoid characters like this, just move yourself. Because basically with the weights, what we're doing is we're mimicking the muscle groups to the best of our ability. Uh, if this is my arm, and I've got radius and ulna in there, and the muscles are attached to the bones. So when the bone moves, the muscle moves with it. And that's what causes the deformation of me as a human. And so, if I move my leg around, I don't want to stand up, but if I move my leg around, right, I'm never going to feel it in the top of my chest. Maybe I'll feel it just at the top of the pelvis, but like beyond that, there's nothing, right? So if I come back to my orc character here and move his foot around again, like realistically, his motion should stop somewhere around here instead of going all the way up to the top of the chest there. So that's one way you can work with humanoid characters, is just use yourself as a guide. And we'll get into more about like the whole process in a bit. That's why I have this big image in the back here. I'll explain why that's there too. Skip this too. Oop, there we go. Alright, so when you're back to object mode, do that selection again, so the armature first, then the model. Go back to weight paint. And let's start by just, you can go through and look for the ones that are causing problems right away. So this one is obviously not right, and I should change it. If I paint, it's automatically going to paint full strength, which is not something we want. And depending on your brush settings, so this is also something we've kind of gone over already, but just to emphasize it a bit more, by default it's always going to be on mix, which is going to basically combine the weights, sort of like using a brush in Photoshop that's got a feather around it. And generally you can get away with using just mix, to be honest, if you just play around with the weight value. The issue is you can't adjust the weight value via pen pressure, but you can adjust the strength, which kind of affects the weight value. It's kind of tricky. That's only if you're using pen pressure though, which typically, like if you were an artist in a studio, you probably would be. One, you'd have a lot more vertices to work with, but for something like this, it's fine for us to just use the mouse. So I'm going to bring my weight down to 0 and leave my strength at 1. Also, if I want to change the size of my brush really quickly, I can just hit F, and F will allow me to change the size. This is probably my favorite feature in all of Blender's painting stuff. I wish Photoshop did something like that as well. But here we are. So we'll bring this down and get rid of the heel. Get rid of the bottom of the foot. And here's where we're going to want to maybe change modes off of mix. I don't want like a hard line like that at the ankle. I want a little bit of smoothness to my transition, so I can turn up the weight a little bit and then bring the strength down to kind of float it in like that. The only issue with changing the strength is that you'll get like it's overlapping. So if I keep painting on one part, so if I'm going around a circle like this and I keep painting on one part more than others, it's going to get a higher weight value, but I want it all to be even. So to fix that, we can instead, oop, missed a few, there we go. We should be able to change this to, where is it? Overlay. And I think by doing that, it shouldn't copy over. Oh, it's not doing anything now. Darken? Which one of these is it? That's strange. Lighten? Lighten works. As long as we have a value that's slightly more than here, so we can use S to sample. Oh, no, we can't. We'll just have to move it manually. And now it's not working again. Oh, it changed itself. Oh, what a mess. Okay, there we go. So this way, if I paint back over, it's only going to go to a certain point because it's lightening. So it can't lighten past a certain point eventually. It just has to stop. So you can get a more even. Whoa. It's doing weird things. We'll just paint it out. Turn it away a little bit. Go back to lighten and just paint on. There we go. All right. So I think all of you already knew that part though. That was all gone over in the lecture. That's part of the assignment. That's pretty much the whole assignment actually, because now we can just move our, in class activity. Now we can just move everything around and see how it changed. You can see it's not rotating. If I move this one, it's rotating our heel with our foot. This one, the heel is staying flat, like not level with the ground, but like flat. Like it's always going to be at a straight angle because we added that weight paint. Let's try and get this one to bend funny. Whoa, too funny. Anyway. Alt G and Alt R to reset all the transformations. And if you posed it from here, you'd have your assignment finished. Pretty much you could just submit with the default weight painting. But since we're going to get a bit more in depth, I'm going to get into the whole process of weight painting for the entire character and how we do that. So I'll unhide everything. And we'll reparent this. Oop, I don't want that to be parented. Cool. So now we can apply that process to the entire model. It doesn't just have to be for the legs. We're going to do it for everything. So you guys detached the legs and worked on them separately. I just added everything at once, so everything's attached together. And that's part of why my leg does go up into my chest, is because it was already attached. But with you guys, because of the way it was separated first, chances are your mesh does actually stop deforming at the pelvis area, which is where it should stop deforming. So yours will probably look a little bit better. But you never really know until you test it. So that's why I have this thing here in the background. Pretty much all you have to do is follow some kind of just a bunch of poses. There isn't really a standard. What I do is I just Google, in this case, like dynamic poses, and just kind of looked for ones that weren't too crazy that I could put my character into and just evaluate how it's deforming. So this one's pretty good. There's nothing too crazy. It's a little bit tricky to see the actual character's movement because of the coat that it's got, but all in all, they're not too extreme. If we look for something more, so something like these, specifically these two, they're a lot more extreme, almost too extreme. If you put your character in those kind of positions, they're more than likely going to deform unless they're ready for like Pixar level animation. They're going to deform improperly. So you have to pick something kind of in the middle, something where The poses are dynamic, but they're not too crazy. And we'll just bring that into Blender. So here I brought it into Blender. And then what I'm going to do is just take, oh, I got rid of the, all right. I'm going to take the armature in pose mode, just move it around, make sure everything works. And what I want to do is just put the character in these poses in whatever order. So I just started with this one on the top left. I've already done it here, more or less. But you can get an idea of where you're having problems. So right here, I can see I'm having major problems in behind the knee. This problem is still from the leg going all the way up to the top of the chest. And if I go into object mode, I can do that selection, go into weight paint mode, go into weight paint mode, and I can adjust my weights while the character is in their posed position. And it will update in real time. So if I were to just crank this to 1 for, what bone am I on? I'm on the leg right now. But if I crank this to 1, you can see it's changing the geometry as if it were being affected by this leg right now. So it's really easy to see how your changes are affecting things. So let's go back to this one. And let's start to clear up some of this stuff. Get rid of the parts at the top of the chest. Bring this down a bit. Oh, I'm still on lighten. That's why. Go back to mix. There we go. So parts we don't want. We don't want so much in here. We don't want to be this high probably. It gets a bit tricky in areas like this where the whole character is kind of deforming inwards. Probably what you'd have to do to get around this is have a certain type of topology, which this character doesn't because it was kind of just done quickly for Gavin's stuff. But we can also change it by affecting other weights. So in this case, now I'm on the hips. I probably want the hips to go all the way around so that these kind of keep their form a bit better and the legs come out, start to come more out of the body. So we can add this in around the hips. Until it looks just a little bit better. Doesn't have to be perfect, just a little bit better. Because it's going to be done iteratively. So if every time you make it just a little bit better, by the time you're done going through a series of poses like this, you'll have usually a much better weight painted mesh. It can be a very time-consuming process, though, I will say. Just going in and doing this for pretty much every single bone. So if I go to the next bone here, this one's the chest bone. I don't want it to affect the back, so I'm going to get rid of all this. I'll bring the weight down, bring the strength up. You can see the back. It's really hard to see, but it's returning to its original place now that I'm dropping the influence from the front bone. Probably want it to come up here a little bit. Maybe a little bit up here. Don't want it down here so much. Don't really want it on the back either. Okay, and this is probably pretty boring to watch, I am aware. And it is equally as boring to do, believe me. Unfortunately, it's just something we kind of have to do as 3D artists, especially if we want proper deformations. It's really hard to just do the topology right the first time and have everything work. So that's where this comes in, and that's why it's so necessary. But we can move on to the next bone now, look for other problem areas. You can see this is kind of folding in on itself, and maybe I wanted to not do that so much. So I'll just click on this bone. And yeah, it seems to be grabbing a lot. So we'll just remove some of the influence over here, especially on the back. Get rid of it around the neck area. Again, I can move my shoulder here to kind of try and figure out where exactly this is going to move if I move my like bicep area around. It's going to grab underneath the shoulders a little bit more. Something like that. And then we'll drop it down towards the chest a little bit more. Sure, why not? It's not great, but for demonstration purposes, it should be enough. Cool. I'm going to go back into object mode. I just take another look around. It looks like that didn't help a whole lot. There's still a lot of bending here. For full accuracy, you can look at muscle and skin images. I wouldn't say it's perfect though. It works a little bit differently. I'd say it's more important that if you are going to use reference from anatomy, that you look at not so much where the muscles connect to exactly, but where they, like, how much influence those muscles have on other muscles and other parts of the body. Yeah, it'd be a lot easier to see on a more muscular person, but not too muscular, because people who are like bodybuilders, there's so little extra skin and extra fat in them that, like, to get, like, the deformations don't really happen as much. Their body kind of just is a rock that moves around. But if you just go on and find some just average people anatomy, things like, if I just do, oh, if you really want to get into that, there's a book called Anatomy for Sculptors, which is a book for digital sculpting, understanding human anatomy and animal anatomy, just all kinds of anatomy, which is a really good book and goes into this kind of stuff as well. It really talks about, like, how, because that's really important in 3D, right, is how your things move around. So that book does a lot of it. But if I just search up anatomy diagram of human muscles, like, something like this might be a bit much. It's easy to see. But you can go with something less. It's a little bit easier to see where the muscles connect when they're not blocking other muscles. That's the only reason I mentioned that. Yeah, but you can use that for sure. Oof. All right. So let's say we're kind of happy with this, although it's not great. But let's just say we're happy with it so we can move on. Um, Now, I made my pose and animation, so I can just flip between them. You can do that if you want to revisit old poses, or you can just pose it, leave it in the timeline, and when you're done, just Alt G, Alt R, and get everything reset back to 0. So I'll just do that here. I don't really want to revisit this pose, don't think I need to, so Alt G, Alt R, bring everything back. I'll delete the keys, and bring it back to 0. Okay, so now it's just repeating the process. So we'll look at another pose here. So let's do, I don't know. some of these it's kind of hard to see. This isn't the greatest reference image, but it's not terrible. Let's do like this one where he's bending over. So that gives a different angle. So I'll start by bending him over. Move these down. It doesn't have to be like at all exact. You're just quickly posing it however it kind of looks like. Doesn't have to be exact at all. You just need to get the idea. I'll bring his whole body down. The other one. Sure. I grab this one and pull it out. And there, I don't know, sure. It doesn't have to be at all the same, it just the general idea. Just to get an idea of where the issues are. So again, we still have issues in the shoulder here. That's kind of usually a given. It's really hard to get those to work properly. It also looks like our IK bones disappeared. Oh, wait. There we go. Cool. So then from the next pose, we can do the same thing. Object mode, back in, back to weight paint, and carry on. So here it's deforming really poorly. Which bone is that? Oh, I didn't select the armature. You gotta make sure you select them both. There we go. So this bone doesn't have any influence on the front. That's why. Oh, is that helping or hurting? Looks like it might be hurting. Turn this down. And really, like, I can't explain a whole lot about why I'm doing anything I'm doing. Really, you just kind of have to look at it. It's a lot more artistic, I guess, than technical, even though it is technically a technical art. Like, you really have to just kind of work on it. It's an iterative process. It's not just, I can't just do it and I'm done, like writing a piece of code. I need to get rid of that. I've got something up in there that I can't see. Where is it? There we go. I can see how it looks a little bit better. It's not deforming as hard and just destroying itself. Turn this down a whole lot. Affect the legs just a little bit. Sure. There we go. Whoops. Just a little bit more. Cool. Go back in object mode. It's better. It's still not great, but it's better. And that's kind of the whole thing. Like, it doesn't need to be great, it just needs to be better, because then when I move on to the next pose, it'll be even better, and then the next pose, the next pose, the next pose, the next pose. Um, there was a paper I read that was trying to get AI to rig things using this method, and I think they went through something like 30 different poses before they had their rigging, or sorry, before they had their weights at like a relatively ideal position. So it takes a lot of time, like I mentioned before, like just going through poses over and over and over again, which is why it's incredibly boring and why usually chances are when doing this, it'll just be a matter of using the automatic weights and then fixing one or two things here or there that are causing major problems, but other than that, kind of just accepting them. It really depends how like in depth you want to go with it, or if you're doing super realistic characters, you're probably going to want to spend more time on it. But if you're doing something like this ogre, chances are you could get away with the automatic weights and just a couple touch-ups for GDW. Is weight painting a separate job? Usually, yeah. So there's kind of 3 or 4 fields of tech art. There's shader authoring, there's rigging, and weight painting. So usually it'll be one person doing the rigging and weight painting. Then you'll have somebody doing the texturing, which texturing can either be tech art, or just regular art. Depends on like the game. Ubisoft, it would be tech art because they'd be making the shaders in like Designer. Yeah, I imagine that most of you have been itching for character modeling, and unfortunately, we have to go through this boring stuff first. If I'm completely honest, I think it's kind of flipped, and I'm not sure why. Last year, I think we did our character modeling first, and for a good reason, because then we get all the good topology stuff done first. But here, since we're doing the rigging first, you don't really get a look at the topology, so that if you work on a character now, chances are the topology is going to get all screwed up when you start rigging. Um, Unfortunately, that's just the way it is this year. Gavin's trying something new. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the way it's like the order it's in, but well, he teaches the topology Jackson during the character modeling sessions. So he won't start like when we start with the character stuff next week. That's when we'll get into topology. So where previously we did the topology first, so we built our character, and then the next week we rigged it, and then the next week we animated it, which seems like a much more natural progression. Because that way he's already taught you the topology and you just have to go apply it to your character. This way it's a little bit backwards. Basically, you might just have to start your character from scratch or make a new rig. I don't know. It's a little bit backwards, I think. But yeah, so character modeling is going to be fun for sure. I will say I'm not the greatest. It's definitely my weakest suit when it comes to 3D stuff because I do a lot of hard surface, not a whole lot of character stuff. But anyway, we'll see how that goes. So where are we? So we finished this pose. I'm honestly not going to start a third pose because I think at this point you guys get the idea of going through each individual pose. So instead I'll get into more constraint stuffs and when to use them and why to use them and all that stuff. I'll just get rid of this. And then after that, we'll take a break and come back and then probably just have maybe another hour. But we shouldn't really run later than 4-ish. But I'll briefly go over the constraints first before that. So I've got this one bone with a constraint on it right here. and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Why would I have a constraint on this toe? It doesn't really do much. And so this all boils back again to when I was talking last week about how you build your engine for the people using it, not for yourself generally. And it's the same for your armatures. And it's the same for, making them usable for your animators as easy as possible. So if you do have somebody who's doing just rigging, it does happen. I'm not sure exactly how your guys' GDW teams are lined up, but you might have people that are more technical, you might have people that are more artsy, and maybe somebody can handle the rigging and somebody else can handle the animation. But whoever's doing the rigging can focus on things like, oh, if I have this toe here and I hit R, it can rotate in any direction and it can rotate any amount that it wants to, right? And that's not how toes work. The only thing that this toe is ever going to do is bend up and down a little bit like this. So this is an example of a constraint that's just being put in place for ease of use, which is honestly what a lot of the constraints are used for. Probably most of them is just to make the armature more easy to use. Messing with weight painting and watching the meshes turn to jello? Jello in what way? Like flopping around? Where was I? Yeah. So if you look at this constraint, so here, if I add constraint, you can see there's a whole bunch, right? Last time we went over copy rotation, but you can see there's also a bunch of limiters. So I can limit the distance that it can move. I can limit the location, the rotation, scale, etc., etc., etc. So here I've limited the rotation, and if I uncheck these, you can see it can rotate in any direction. Now Gavin likes to show the axes, and this is part of the reason why. Is if I come into my constraint here, I want to only rotate on this bone's local x-axis. So I know it's going the same way as the world axis, but in like the case of this hand, it's not going the same way as the world axis. So you need to check with the actual overlay. But here it's on the x-axis, so I'm just going to limit the y and z motion. So now when I hit R, I don't have to hit X to rotate. I just hit R, and it's only going to rotate on the x-axis. Right? It can still rotate inside of itself, which we don't exactly want, but we can also change that. So now I'm going to limit to X. By default, they're set to 0, 0, and if they're at 0, 0, then that means it won't move at all. It has 0 rotation, and you also have to make sure to change this to local space. In this case, it's fine with world space. No, it's not. Never mind. Still local space. Change it to local space. Apparently this thing's flipped backwards, which makes sense since this Y is going that way and world's Y is... Anyway. So if I hit R now, I've limited the minimum rotation to negative 45 degrees, so the foot can only go down that much. I can't rotate it any more than that, no matter how hard I try. And I've limited the max to 60, so it can only rotate 60 degrees up. So 45 degrees down and 60 degrees up. This way, when whoever's animating is using the rig, there's no way that they can break the mesh by having it fly in through itself, because when I'm doing my weight painting and doing my constraints, I've limited it to make sure I can only go in a realistic motion. You might have to adjust, I haven't adjusted the weights for this, so you can see it's still kind of grabbing the back of the foot instead of just the toe, but yeah. And there are a lot of uses for these constraints. You can have bones that are a lot of bones that just don't exist or don't deform your mesh, and you can just even hide them on another layer. It's almost like you're getting references to them to use them, but they're hidden. I don't know how to put it, to be honest. It's kind of like using something hidden. Other than saying it's just a hidden reference, it's just you can't access it. The animator can't click on it, so they can't screw it up. And then, yeah. Let's see if I can use one of these as one of those. Okay. So let's say, where's there? This one. Okay. So let's say we don't want this bone to be accessible by the animator because its main purpose isn't for animation, right? If I move it around, it doesn't do proper things. Um, so we don't want our animator to use this bone. We're purely using it because we want to reference it so we can have our neck location attached to our chest and our body. That's why it's there. Yeah, exactly. You don't want anyone using this bone. So what we can do is just hit M, and that brings up bone layers. So it's kind of similar to collections in the hierarchy. When you hit M on an object, it adds it to a new collection. Here, if I hit M, it's going to change the bone layer. And if I click on the second layer, for example, you can see it's now disappeared. And I can't click on it. And if I were to pass this mesh or this rig off to an animator, they wouldn't be able to click on it and use it unless they came over here to the armature tab and clicked on the second layer. But even though it's hidden, if I make my transformations, oops, which one? This one? This one. There it is. If I make my transformations, if I see the second layer, it's still working. So it's not like when you hide vertices. If you hide vertices in edit mode, you can no longer affect them, right? And so any changes you make happen independent of them. But here, bones on other layers, if you don't have the layer selected, they're still affected by everything that is visible. So that way I can keep it, it stays where it's supposed to be instead of staying down here, which would cause something like this. So that way I can hide this bone from my animators and I can leave just the important ones, right? And these important ones would normally have control meshes. So those circles and other things like that. You guys are all good on control. Come on. There we go. You guys are all good on like control meshes, things like that. Does anybody have any specific questions about how to make the meshes or how to make the bones show up as other bones or things like that? I guess not. You did miss the earlier lecture, so I'm not sure how you added the control handles. Cool. So I can go over that quickly. So the reason we separate these bones is because we don't want our animators to see them. So these ones, we don't have to worry about adding control meshes for them. But these ones, we do. In this case, I can even hide these bones, because all they're going to do is cause confusion for whoever's trying to animate, because if I click on these and try and move them, you'll notice they don't do at all what you want them to. So let's go ahead and move these to the second layer as well. And I'll do the same thing to these bones. And these bones. Cool. So these are all the bones that I want the animator to see. Character control, the root bone, upper body control, lower body control, the head and the neck, but not the spine, the clavicles, and the hands. You can see everything still works just fine, even though my bones are hidden. So now, let's get into making control mesh. I'll start with the root bone. Hide the axes. And I'll make a new mesh, and we'll just make a circle here. And there's no like standard for this. There are a few, I guess, shapes that generally are used. Let's extrude these out. Dissolve that. So you don't have to worry about tris or quads or anything with these. These are basically just outlines. That's all. So you don't have to worry about topology. Delete that edge. Delete that edge. How the bones outside of the mesh were created. Oh, you mean these ones? Ah, okay. So these are IK bones, which I don't think he went over in the lecture yet. I think he's probably going to go over that next lecture, but pretty much, if I bring these back, that explains a lot. Yeah, I went over it briefly in the first tutorial, or in the last tutorial, but it wasn't really something that's going to be gone over in class for a little bit. But essentially, like really briefly, this bone is extruded at a 90-degree angle, or not a 90-degree, but at like a flat angle from the leg bone, for example, and this becomes my target bone. So this is unparented from anything. If I hop into edit mode, it's just a floating bone. Sorry, well, it's parented to the root bone, but everything's parented to the root bone. It's not parented to this leg at all. And what's happening is this leg has an IK constraint that runs up through this bone and this bone. So it's set to a chain length of 2. And anytime I move this bone, what's happening is it's calculating how it can bend or rotate from this point to this point, and then from this point to this point. Yeah. So it's not anything too crazy. To add IK constraints, you can just go to the bone constraint tab. It's like a bone with a slice of meat. Or for IK specifically, what you can do is click on the bone you want to add it to. Sorry, click on the target bone. So you can see I've named this one leg IK target. Click on the other bone. And if you hit Shift I already have one, so it's not going to let me, but if I hit Shift I, it'll say to active bone. See, it turns yellow. And it's automatically assigned this bone as our target. So if I move it, it's already targeted. But it's freaking out because this is set to 0 instead of 2. So we set it 2 to go all the way up the leg, and then we're good. For the poles, instead of being extruded out from the where our target is, it's extruded from sort of the midpoint. So in this case, the knee. So this is going to control which way it's facing. So same thing, it's separated entirely. And then we go in and we can set our pole target to foot pole, leg pole. And it'll do this. Yeah, exactly. It maintains the distance to the target bone. And the pole determines which way it bends towards the target bone. So if you can imagine the target bone is here, and my other bone is here, it could bend up and down, it could bend down and up, it could bend left and right, any of those directions. So that's where the pole bone comes in. So I can tell it, you know, hey, I want it to go up and down, or I want it to go down and up, and then it has to listen to me. So we'll set this pole angle to -90, I think. Nope, that is backwards. 90, and now it's all lined up. And you can see his knee will rotate to face this pole. So that's another brief rundown on IK. And it's the exact same thing in the arms here. I've got the exact same setup going. This bone has its own pole, has its own target. I can change the elbow. Yeah. Well, that's where the constraints come in, right? So I can take this bone here, for example. I don't want this guy to be able to bend his shoulder around like that. So I can turn on my axes and let's add a constraint. So Control Shift C to add a constraint. And let's do a rotation limit. Where is it? Limit rotation. Boom. And you can see there's no real good axis to use here because we use Y. rotate this around. Go back to the constraint, and if we limit y, yeah, local space. Which way is it rotating? Actually, I wonder. Ah, that's what it is. The constraint's conflicting with the IK, so it's not actually letting me constrain it. It's like it's working locally, so I'm changing the rotation here and things happening because it's being limited. But because I'm affecting it externally here, it's not working. You can add as many constraints as you want. So, like, if I wanted this bone to copy this bone's location, copy this bone's rotation, and copy this bone's scale, I could add all of those. Usually you just need one, maybe two on each bone, and that's about it. Just to sort of limit simple things, especially for like these assignments, just limit simple things like this, just so it's easier to use. With that though, I think that covers most of the weight painting stuff and the constraint stuff. I can go more in depth on certain things if people want me to, but for now, I'll say why don't we take a 5 or 10 minute break, and then when we come back, I'll go over drivers, which are, I don't even know how to put them. They're basically bones that drive other bones. So it's just more of the non-deformation bones. And it's kind of like using constraints, but it's a little bit different. Because you can use drivers for a lot more than just transformations. Okay, vague and interesting. Yeah, it's great. It allows you to combine bones with animations, like pre-existing animations and pre-existing shape keys, all that kind of stuff. For example, one that gets used a lot is taking one bone's rotation and linking that bone's rotation to another bone's position or animation. So like you can imagine if I rotate my bone, it will play through an animation as I rotate, kind of thing. They don't have a ton of uses, but they're really powerful when you can use them. So we'll get into that in like 10 minutes. I'm going to go grab some water, and then we'll be back. All right, we're back. Yeah, just a quick break. Yeah, I covered IK. Oh God, where are we? Oh, there's a lot of stuff. Uh, chat. Yeah, the chat has been quiet. I imagine you're probably right, Ryan. It's probably because of the midterm burnout. And honestly, it's fine because today's like I don't know. The stuff we're going over today is as you can probably tell, mostly a repeat from last week, right? There's not a whole ton of new content. A bit late, probably burned out. Yeah, Gary, you just missed like last week's stuff. It's nothing too new. I went over the weight painting a little bit, but nothing crazy. Talked about constraints a little bit more and why we use them. But there's not like I can't get in depth with theory because there's no new theory. It's just this is a constraint. This is what it does. Here's when to use it. It's not really like I can't give you specific use cases because it's always going to be up to the individual and things like that. So not a whole lot that I can actually show you guys until next class. And yeah, the orc model is in the files. Yeah, for the first 30 minutes, I just went over the process for weight painting, so putting the character in different poses and painting over it. It's all going to be in the recording though, if you wanted to watch it back later, but it's nothing too complicated, and it could easily be summarized in like 5 minutes, to be honest, because it's just a repeating process. And yeah, no sample file because it would do the activity for you. I guess I could have made a separate sample file and deleted the weightings. You have to import it. So file, import, obj. Yeah, so you have to have your own blend file going. You can't just open it up straight. Yeah, all in all, I think this is kind of a burnout week. I think for everybody. Our year's having a rough time. You guys just finished your midterms. Yeah, sure. Could be the online thing too, but usually the weeks are a bit more energetic than this. Oh, another midterm Thursday too. Okay, that makes more sense. Yeah, everybody's in burnout week, which is fun because we also had burnout week last week. So like, welcome to game dev, you know? How do I separate the mesh for weight painting without removing it from the base mesh? Like, how did I separate it? Like today? Gavin separated it during his lecture. I didn't separate it. Or do you mean like, or do you mean like this part? Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what you mean either. Yeah, go for it. And yeah, if anyone has things, they can just turn on. Oh wait, hold on. Actually, I don't know if my audio is going through these or not. It might be going to my speaker. Okay, yeah, you're good. You can just turn it on. Hey, Jackson. Yep, gotcha. Mm-hmm. So So like this, you've got your object into different parts like this. So after the reason we did it that way is because we didn't have the rest of this, so all of this doesn't exist technically. It's just the legs. So if I go back, wrong mode. If I parent these now, they're still there in mine, but just pretend they don't exist. Now when I go in here, I just have access to this, and if I move them around, there should be a really hard edge. Oh, there isn't because this wouldn't have anything. There we go. Alright, now this should be what you have. So you should have, you know, this. You have this, right? So once you painted the weights and you're happy with them for these legs, you go to object mode, and it's not so much hiding them as just rejoining them to the base. So it nuked the pose mode. If I combine this. They shouldn't do that. They should just snap like this, and then you can merge them. And now if I move the leg around, you're still going to have the seam. But then you can go into the weight paint for this particular bone. Although your problem sounds a little bit more specific than that. Yeah, trying to rejoin the armature back might work. Yeah. Yeah, just let me know. You can turn your mic again later if you have it figured out or if you don't have it figured out. But yeah, once you rejoin them, you can just go into the top bones, like these ones. Come on. And do that like little dithering effect to sort of make it not so harsh. It's not derailing. Like I said, not a crazy. It's another very chill tutorial. It's kind of last minute too because I've been working on assignments for umpteen hours straight. I went to bed at like 4 a.m. last night and then woke up for class. So not a whole lot. Yeah, but what I can show you for sure now is driver bones, and then that'll probably wrap us up, to be honest. So hopefully that shouldn't take us more than half an hour to an hour, especially since nobody's following along. There isn't really a whole lot to get caught up on. You just might have to rewatch the tutorial if you miss something. But let's try driver bones, which is also, I guess I have to kind of get into animation to show driver bones off, but also I hope I remember how driver bones work, because I did not have time to give that a shot before the tutorial. So I'll make a new bone here. So I've just made a new bone sitting off the top of the IK bone. For no particular reason, I could have made this bone literally anywhere. I just happened to make it here. Okay. It should be a right click. Let's go into pose mode now. Yeah, there it is. Okay. So where's our IK? Here's our IK bone. So let's say we want our IK bone to go like, I don't know, forwards and backwards like this. What I can do is right click our location. So in this case, I'm going to go with location Y. And you can see a whole bunch of options come up. I think you guys can see this. Windows, please. Thank you. So right here, location Y is what we want to change. We can lock it. We can animate it, what we're going to do is add driver. So I think I can hover over it. Yeah, if you hover over it and Control D, that also works. And you can see it brings up a bunch of things. It's basically scripting bones with other bones. So I'm essentially passing in one bone to this other bone's function as a parameter with all of its transform and everything, and I can change the parameter. I can add to the parameter, subtract from the parameter with this here. It doesn't just have to be +2. I could do minus, I could do equals, I could do like plus equals, I could do whatever. I believe it's written, like the back end of this is done in Python, I believe. So most of those, like any of these, I think you can't do plus plus because of that though. I don't think Python has plus plus, so you can't do plus plus. But you could do +1. Per frame. Uh, I'm pretty sure it's per delta time, so it's instant. It's not held to like a frame cap. It's as, or I guess that is frame per frame. It would be frame per frame, then it's interpolated in between frames. Oh wait, yeah, it's written in Python. This is right there. Error. So right now we have our variable here. So we have our transform variable. I can call this something else. So I can call this like controller. We'd have to rename it up here to controller as well. And this stuff is really fun. I really like this stuff because it's basically just, like I said, you're programming bones, which is pretty sick. You can add other input variables to here. So I could add a second bone. I could add just a straight up single property variable. So I could literally just have some kind of int here. You don't have to include int or anything like that because it's Python. You can just say like x and set a value for it. I'm going to delete that though. Instead, oh no, what did I do? Go back. Instead, I'm going to click on object here. Add my armature. We're going to add this bone here. What do I call it? Okay, target 1. Let's just call it leg underscore IK underscore driver left. No real naming conventions for these either, just however you want to name them. Go back to our other bone. Shift D. Controller armature bone. We'll find our driver bone. So there it is. And then we're going to have a few things here. So there's type. So type is what we want from this bone's transform. You can access all of them. Right now, let's just go with let's go with X rotation. Or yeah, let's go with rotation on X. So I'll go back to this bone. Go back to my driver. Keeps adding extra variables because I keep exiting. Let's pick, yeah, X rotation in local space. So you can see currently its value is set to 0 here. If I rotate this on X, oh, it's using quaternions. Hold on. There. Change this back, so controller +0. There we go. So now the X rotation of this bone is linked to our IK. So I can rotate this around on its x-axis and you can see that it's either moving the bone forwards or backwards. Right? It's crazy. It's great. I forgot to clear the parent on this though, so I definitely don't want this bone to be parented since it's a driver. So I'm going to clear the parent. And I'm going to make sure that it's checked off as deform because I don't want it to be a deform bone. There we go. And now I should be able to just rotate it around on X. Or not. What's going on? I might have undone it by accident. Yeah, I did. Actually, so it stops doing that. I'm just going to rename this back to var. Update. There we go. So now I can mix and match this with constraints. So let's get rid of the rotation on this here. Let's say I want it to be able to bend this far only and this far only. Then I can add a constraint to this bone. So Control Shift C, and I'm going to limit its rotation on the x-axis. So say its max is 180 and its min is 0. And now I should be able to local space. Sorry, negative 90, 90. So I can rotate this around on the x-axis 90 degrees and it'll limit. So that way my IK bone doesn't just go flying into like next year. Right? So coming up with use cases for this is not exactly easy. I mean, they're pretty obviously technical, very technical. Usually you're just using drivers with like really advanced rigs, but you can use them to control a lot. Like there I was using this bone's rotation to control this one's position. And I can combine those things. So if I go back to pose mode, I can move this over here and then do this. I won't be able to move this on the y-axis anymore though, because the y-axis, this bone's y-axis is now owned by this bone's rotation. So another use for that is very time consuming, and maybe I don't have time, but I can explain it briefly. Right now, because we're using IK on this arm, right, I can't rotate these bones individually. So if I wanted to just do standard like FK on my arm, at the moment I'm not able to. I have to use the IK. But using drivers, you can add bones, like here I could add a bone that takes the influence of the IK and actually disables it. And then once it's disabled, I can use FK again. Actually, why don't we just show it? It shouldn't be that hard. I use Bell, honestly. Haven't had that many problems with it. Sometimes it just goes out for no reason, but not too bad. Oops. Clear parent. Let's bring this boat up here. So sometimes you'll see this bone as like a literal, like literally the words FK or IK. I think that's how some of them do it. Some of them also have like the really advanced rigs. If you go to blender.org or Blender Cloud, something like that, they have a rig called the Rain rig, and it's something that they showed off for the release of 2.8, I believe it was, with Eevee. And their rig is super advanced if you want to like get hands-on with like a Pixar level character and a Pixar level rig. It's insane. Crashed my old computer. It's like really, really intense stuff. But if you want to get your hands on something like that, you can look at how they've even written scripts for the bones so that their values show up in a tool panel. So you can just have a switch, just switch in the tool panel between IK and FK instead of rotating some random bone. Crazy stuff like that. Oh yeah, Starlink. That's a wild thing. Elon Musk is doing some wild stuff. I think it's really cool if it works. Until Elon Musk decides to turn it into a monopoly and just destroy everyone. And then once he has everyone's business, just turn up the prices. Would he do that? I don't know, but if he does, that'd be sad. Rogers and Bell is already a monopoly, yeah, pretty much, but like not to that extent where it's one guy controlling everything. At least I don't think Rogers and Bell are owned by the same guy anyway. Anyway, back to this. So on my influence, I'm going to hover over and hit Control D now. And you can see I've added variable. I'm going to select my armor. I don't know why it does that. It doesn't like me today. Bone, influence, driver, Control D. My object is my armature. My bone is, what is this bone? Arm upper 001. Arm upper 001. I'm just same thing for this one. I'm going to use its, should really use its X rotation in local space. Auto Euler. Update. Okay. So if I rotate this on X now, nope, it's not doing it. There we go. You would normally want to constrain this so that it would only work, or sorry, so that it'd be normalized between 0 and 1, so that it maps properly to the influence. But here, I think if I rotate it this way, yeah, so now the influence is 0. So if I rotate this bone 90 degrees this way, now I can use FK, right? Which is just regular forward kinematics, which is really good, because if you're doing something like a, let's say you manage to get skeletal animation in, right? Or for next year, if you're using Unity and you want to use skeletal animation, and you want to have the character, has anyone played Obra Dinn? Obra Dinn has some really good examples of this. But basically, if you have like this object here, let's say this is part of the world, like a railing, and I want my character to grab this object, like actually grab the object. I could use IK to get the hand to the object, right? And I could have it stick to the object as the character moves around in the space in engine. But then if I want the character to be running, and I'm doing a run animation, I don't want to use IK for that. Using IK for a run animation is really tricky. There's getting it to move properly is really hard. You just want to use forward kinematics because for a run animation, you're going to just work from the shoulder. So you want to rotate from the shoulder and then rotate from the other arm. So you want to use forward there. So that's why it's good to have a switch like that, so you could switch between forwards and inverse, just like that. You want both. Backwards kinematics. I've never really thought about it like that, but yeah, forwards and inverse, not exactly opposites. Who decides these things? I don't know, but I don't make the rules, I just play by them. At the moment, Gary, no, I'm not moving anything. I just finished up moving with the driver bone stuff to show you that example of IK versus FK. The last example I can show for usefulness in drivers is back to that other rig I showed you guys a few times. I can't show this one in lecture because there's just not enough time. But you have things called actions in Blender, which are kind of like just small animations. That way you can have all of your animations in a single file but are still separate. So in this case, I have one here called foot roll L and foot roll R. And all that animation is I animated the foot just like going up on its tiptoes and then healing back. If I click on this bone here, which one of these is it? you can see that's the foot roll animation. So this has been linked as a driver to an entire animation, which is linked to all of these bones. Pull up the foot roll. Is this right? This is left. You see, this is the animation. So I just animated that really quickly. And then now, if I go back, but now my animator can just control the foot roll. I'm in the wrong thing here. It all got messed up. But now my animator can just control the foot roll using this, which makes it way easier to use. So that's another use for that. And again, here you can see an example of how I've hidden all of the bones that I don't want the animator to see. If I fly down here, you can see I've got this other layer with a bunch of extra bones that are hidden, so that they just see this. And that is, I mean, those are three of the most useful cases for using drivers, but I hope you get the idea. Again, like I said, it's really hard to teach specific use cases because it's like where and when you use these drivers it's up to you. I mean, you don't even have to use them at all, right? I find them super convenient. Yeah, that's part of the issue with this kind of stuff. There's not a whole lot I can directly tell you. Kind of, you just have to experiment with things and come back to me if you like need help with getting it to work for whatever it is you're trying to do with it. But it's hard for me to just say definitively right now, like this is something you can do with it, because you might not want a foot roll controller, you know? And I think nope, we're good. So yeah, so those are some good examples of it. I think honestly that's kind of it for today. Because in the lecture, all that really went over during the lecture was just extra weight painting. And there's not a whole lot more I can cover on weight painting other than what I already have. It's pretty, like I said, it's pretty artistic, so it's just up to you guys to sort of go through the process and take your time and do each step over and over and over until it looks good. So with that, if anybody still has questions about the in-class activity, I can run through actually doing it. I'll delete my armature from scratch and everything, and we'll just go through the in-class activity together. Good for now. All right, well, if you've already submitted your in-class and you're good, then I guess goodbye. I'll see you next week when we have some real content. Finally, we'll be doing some exciting stuff with characters and everything. And it will be so much less boring than this one, but content pog. Yeah, you know how much I love when Gavin teaches all this stuff and I can actually teach you guys things instead of just having to wait till next week. Because I know it sucks for you guys and it sucks for me. Like you guys watch, like it's painful for me to just sit here and do it. So you guys watching it must be like twice as painful. So like, hopefully we can limit the number of tutorials like that. Especially starting next week. You guys will have your own character designs probably starting next week. I hope that's the plan, or that's Gavin's plan, is to talk about that kind of stuff Thursday. Most of the things after weight painting went right over my head. None of that is a requirement, I'll say, to be perfectly honest. Like, there's no you don't have to use drivers, you don't have to use constraints, you don't have to use IK. None of those things are like part of the final rubric, if I'm not mistaken. You just need to have something animated. It doesn't matter how you animate it. So you don't have to worry about it too much, Jonathan, but like you can always review the recordings or just give me a message and I can help you out with it. So yeah. Thanks for coming, guys. This is a real quick one. Hopefully not too confusing. Hopefully didn't leave anybody behind. I know it's also even more boring because there was no file today to follow along with since this is basically your submission. But it is what it is for this week. Like I said, if you do have specific rigging questions, though, feel free to give me a message. I am definitely a lot better with helping your problems than trying to fake my own problems and then solve them in front of the class. So if you do have problems, let me know. Other than that, I will catch you guys later. Good luck on your midterms. See you around. I'll stop the recording here too.